Okay, so we have enough copies here. Okay, so this is the day I know that you've all been waiting for. We're coming back to Sefer Yeshua, Breaks Yom Tovim b'chulu until we get to the next Yom Tov. But okay, back to Sefer Yeshua. So first of all, this shir breakfast is being sponsored by Nishmas L'Kovin Shaiv L'Voisha, and we should be zeichet to all the shef that comes from his kashas to tzaddikim and his kashas with each other.
Also, Shirley and Benny Wilson.
Shirley and Benny Wilson also for their grandfather, right? Yisrael ben Zachariah and Shom Shalom Aliyah, and with that, Shev Bracha and Hatzlacha should come to them, the whole mishpacha, the whole kilo, all Klal Yisrael. Okay, so in Sefer Yeshua, what we're up to is towards the end of Perek Ches. Now, you don't have in front of you the actual text of Sefer Yeshua, so let me give you just get back into the, I don't know what to call it, the storyline, but to get back into the topic of Sefer Yeshua. So again, Moshe Rabbeinu's Nifter, Zayin Adar, the Jewish people are now, the leadership has been given over to Yeshua ben Nun. Yeshua ben Nun brings Klal Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael, crosses over the Yarden, and the first city we conquer is the city of Yerichai, with, physically speaking, Kemat no opposition at all. It took a lot of avodah, the Jewish people's part, but Lamaisa, in terms of ruchnius, but the city of Yerichai was conquered relatively easily. And then we go into the next city, the city of Ai. The city of Ai gave us some problems. There was a sin that the Jewish people or one person committed, the sin of Achan. We're not going into that again, but the point is there was some kitrug against the Jewish people, and because of that, the city of Ai caused us some difficulties. So that was the first time we had a loss. There was the first attempt to conquer the city of Ai failed, and the Jewish people had to rechazik themselves, do tshuva v'chulu, and then eventually the second attempt we had to go with more b'derech hateva. They had to go with strategy and so on. But then the city of Ai was conquered, and that's where we're up to now. Now, the next part of the story is that the Yeshua ben Nun keeps on going to more and more cities and so on. But at the end of Perek Ches, right after the description of the conquest of Ai, Sefer Yeshua, the pasuk talks about sort of a side story. And this side story takes us a little bit back into the beginning of Sefer Yeshua. So again, so you don't have this in front of you, but I'll just read out loud just a few psukim that, from the beginning of Sefer Yeshua, and then going back to the psukim after the conquest of Ai. So it's like this. When the Jewish people crossed over the Yarden, or when we were about to cross over the Yarden, so it says like this. The pasuk says that Yeshua ben Nun, these are the psukim. V'yomer Hashem el Yeshua leimar. Hashem says to Yeshua the following message. Again, this is going back when we first were crossing over the Yarden. So Hashem says to Yeshua, K'chu lechem min ha'am. I want you to now designate 12 people. Shnei masar nashim. Hashem says to Yeshua, designate 12 people from the Jewish people. Ish echad, mi shevet. One person from one of the tribes. Okay, 12 yidden from the 12 shvatim. V'tzavu oisem leimar. Hashem says to Yeshua, I want you to command them, again, this is when we're crossing over, I want you to command them the following message. S'u lechem mizem mitocha yarden. I want you, these 12 people, I want them to, when they're crossing over the Yarden, find 12 large stones. Take these 12 stones, mimatzav ragli kahanim, from where the kahanim were. Right? If you remember, the way we crossed over was through the kahanim carrying the aron. And when the Kahanim went into the Aron, when their feet went into the Yarden, that's when the waters split. So Hashem says to Yeshua, designate 12 people from the 12 Shvatim. They're going to go to the area where the Kahanim are standing with the Aron, and they'll find 12 stones. V'havartem oisam imachem. Carry these stones over with you through the Yarden. V'anachtem oisam v'maloin asher tulina b'alayla. And erect them, set them up in the place that you're going to be sleeping tonight. The place that they slept that night is a place that's called Gilgal. I want you to set up those stones, okay? The Yikra Yeshua Shnei Ma'aser Ish. So Yeshua ben Nun calls these 12 people, he appoints them. V'yarver lehem Yeshua, and he tells them this message, that you're going to go through the Yarden, you're going to go to where the Kahanim are, you're going to find 12 stones, and you're going to erect them. And now Yeshua ben Nun fills in a little bit of a blank of what these stones are about. That these stones will be a sign amongst you, amongst Klal Yisrael, and so on and so forth. And he says, "Lemispra shifte b'nei Yisrael," that these stones will be a reminder of this miracle of us entering into Eretz Yisrael. And these stones represent the 12 tribes. Right? That's what there's 12 men, 12 stones, the 12 shvatim. That's what these stones are. Okay, that's what happens in the beginning of Sefer Yeshua. That's it. These stones will be a memory and sort of a representation of Klal Yisrael and the miracles that we earn, that we experience right now. That'll be a memory from these stones. Okay, and the pasuk says that's what they did, and so on and so forth. That's, again, this is in Perek Dal. This is the story of Klal Yisrael entering into Eretz Yisrael with the Yarden. That's part one of these stones. All of a sudden, at the end of going back to Perek Ches, which is again after the conquest of the city of Ai, so now the pasuk goes back to talk about these stones, and this is where we have to figure out like exactly what happened over here, like practically, chronologically. But the pasuk says as follows: "Uz then," which sounds like, in other words, now after the conquest of Ai, Yivne Yeshua Mizbech LaShem Elokei Yisrael B'Har Eivel. Yeshua builds an altar in the area that they were in. The area that they were in, which is the place of Ai, there were two mountains in that area. One called Har Eivel and one called Har Grizim. That's the area that they were in. And so it says in pasuk that Yeshua took the 12 stones. These 12 stones that was referenced in the beginning when they crossed the Yarden, Yeshua ben Nun took those 12 stones now by the place of Har Eivel, Har Grizim, Har Eivel, the place of the city of Ai. And it says that he built from those 12 stones a Mizbech. That's what it says. Kasher tziva Moshe eved Hashem es bnei Yisrael. And says the pasuk, and this is something that Moshe Rabbeinu already commanded the Jewish people about, Gekos b'sefer Taras Moshe, as is recorded in Chumash. We'll see that in a moment. That there's this mitzvah of building a mizbeach from these 12 stones. Mizbeach avonim shleimos, a mizbeach, a full erected mizbeach of stone. Asher lo yehanav le'im barzel, which all the halachas of a mizbeach, that a mizbeach can't be cut, the stones of a mizbeach can't be cut with metal. Same thing over here. It was a full bona fide mizbeach. The yalav oilas la'Hashem. They brought sacrifices, korban oilas, v'yizbechu shlamim. They brought oilas and shlamim, all different korbanos, and so on. That's the first thing they did with these stones. They made it into a mizbeach and they brought korbanos. And number two, the yichtef sham al havanim, and says the pasuk, they also took those stones that they just turned into a mizbeach by this place of Har Eivel, Har Grizim Eivel, by the city of Ai. The yichtef sham al havanim, and then Yeshua ben Nun goes and he writes on the stones as Mishnah Torahs Moshe. He writes on the stones the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, which we'll have to see. Probably next week we'll talk about this more. What exactly he wrote on this? All of Chumash, Sefer Dvarim, maybe just the Tarek Mitzvahs. There's all different sheets of what he wrote, but there's some sort of, writing on these stones, the Torah. The Torah was written on these stones. Asher Kasel Fnei Bnei Yisrael, he writes this in front of the Jewish people. The Chol Yisrael was the Kena, the V'shaitav, all the leadership are there. They're all standing by these stones and by these mountains. La'aron, with the Aron Habris as well, and it's a whole inyan. V'achar Ken Karas called Divrei HaTorah. So they write it down. They write the Torah down on these stones again. We'll see next week what exactly was written down. But the pasuk says they wrote the Torah on these stones, and so then Yeshua ben Nun reads what was written. Bracha v'haklala. It's a whole procedure what's going on. But that's the kitzer what's going on over here. Lo hayadav, and then the pasuk ends off. Lo hayadav mikol asher tziva Moshe. There was nothing from what Moshe Rabbeinu commanded the Jewish people to do, that Yeshua ben Nun did not read and did not perform. So whatever we were commanded to do, Yeshua ben Nun did. Okay. So in terms of these stones, so we have sort of two parts of Sefer Yeshua talking about them. The first time we hear about these 12 stones is again in the beginning when we're crossing over. That Hashem says to Yeshua ben Nun, get 12 people from each one of the Shvatim and designate these stones, place them in the place that you're going to be sleeping tonight, the place of Gilgal, and it'll be a sort of a zecher and a representation of the 12 tribes. Okay, that's the beginning. All of a sudden, again, the Sefer continues, the city of Yerichai, the city of Ai, and so on. And after the city of Ai is conquered, the pasuk goes back talking about these 12 stones, that Yeshua ben Nun takes these 12 stones again, makes them into a mizbeach, and writes on the 12 stones the Torah, and references that this is something that Moshe Rabbeinu commanded them. So where is this coming from? So okay, that's so take a look at the Marmakim that you have. So in Marmakim number 1, So you have a few psukim from Parshas Kisavai. Okay, this is the end of Sefer Dvarim. So this is in fact one of the mitzvahs. And it's one of those, we might just read Kisavai is ready in the summer. People just Shnai Mikra is already Bracious Noya. That's Shnai Mikra by Kisavai. Only the the most brave of us is holding over there. So, but this is what it says in Parshas Kisavai. So this is Moshe Rabbeinu telling the Jewish people, okay? V'haya b'yom, we'll just read through the psukim together, and then we'll try to put it all together. V'haya b'yom asher tavos ha'yarden. It says Moshe Rabbeinu, the day that you cross over the Yarden, el aretz asher Hashem Elokecha noisin lach, the day to the land that Hashem will give you. So the day that you cross over the Yarden, v'aki moisi l'cha avanim gedolos, you should erect big stones. V'sad da'osim v'sid, you should cover them in lime. We'll speak about that maybe next week, this Indian of covering them in sid, in lime, but that's the place. Because the day you cross over the Yarden, says Moshe Rabbeinu, erect big stones. Doesn't say how many, but erect the big stones. V'kasavta leim es divrei ha-Torah hazais. You should write on them the words of this Torah. Ba'avracha, when you pass over. Laman asher tavei el ha'aretz asher Hashem Elokecha noisin lach. This should be a schos that to give you strength to be able to make it to the land. Eretz of Aschal V'Dvash, land of Eretz Yisrael, flowing milk and honey. Kashadibra Shem Eloi Kev Esachalach, as the Rebbeinu Shalom told you and promised you. Fine. So then the pasuk, then Moshe Rabbeinu continues with a little bit more detail, and he repeats himself. All this, there's a lot of repetition over. We have to break it down. V'hayab avrachem es hayarden, says Moshe Rabbeinu again. When you cross over the Yarden, tekimus avanim ha'ela, you should erect these stones. Asher arech yitzav eschem hayayim, that I'm commanding you about today. Bahar Evel, you should erect them by Har Evel. That's the place near the city of Ai, right? The Sadais and the Sid, and again cover them with lime. Ubenisa sham mizbech l'Hashem Elokecha. And now he introduces this other idea that you should build over there, presumably with these stones, a mizbech for Hashem. Mizbech avonim made of these stones. Like son of barzel, don't use any metal, just pure stone. Avonim shleimus tivnes mizbech Hashem Elokecha, full mizbech made of these stones. Valisa olav oilas l'Hashem Elokecha, bring karbonis on it. V'zavach t'shlamim ve'echalta sham v'samach t'fnei Hashem Elokecha, and so on. V'chasavtes al avonim, and again he repeats, write on these stones. It's called divrei Torah zois. All the words of this Torah bear hativ in a very clear way. Okay, so this is what Sefer Yeshua is referencing, that something that Moshe Rabbeinu commanded us, Yeshua ben Nun is fulfilling. And this is the command. So that Moshe Rabbeinu is telling us something. It's interesting. Nowhere does it say how many stones. That was, Tarsh Bal Peh, that it was 12. But this is the parsha that Moshe Rabbeinu is telling us about, and Yeshua ben Nun is fulfilling, of, again, when you cross over the Yarden, erect these 12 stones, cover them with lime, okay? And then two things are also mentioned: make them into a mizbeach and write on them the words of Torah. And that's basically what it says in Sefer Yeshua. Okay, but if, again, without breaking it down and to little mamish pratim, but the psukim that we just read in Parashas Kisavai, there's a lot of repetition. Moshe Rabbeinu, the first couple of psukim, he tells us the day that you cross over the Yarden, establish these stones and write on them the words of Torah, and then he sort of repeats himself again. When you cross over the Yarden, erect these stones, build it into Mizbech, and write on them the words of Torah. There's a lot of repetition over here. So first of all, we have to figure out why in Parshas Kisavai is Moshe Rabbeinu giving these instructions in such a strange way with repetition and not being clear right away what he's talking about. And then also figuring out in Sefer Yeshua, like what actually happened chronologically. Because again, in the beginning part where we first cross over the Yarden, that's when it's discussed. That's when it says that he appointed 12 people, take these 12 stones and erect them, and that's the end of the discussion. And then we only reference back to these stones after the conquest of Ai. That by the way, those stones turned to a mizbeach and write on them the words of the Torah. So were these two different events? Is this just like ein muktim mukhar b'Torah? It really happened. So when it was all just in one big story, but did it happen early? Did it happen later? How do we work it out? So the truth is, this is a discussion amongst the Mefarshim, when it happened, how it happened. But for the purposes of this morning, we're going to go with the Malbim. Okay. So in Maramukah number 2, the Malbim on Sefer Yeshua in Perches after the conquest of Ai. So he talks about this sugya of the 12 stones, and he says like this: he says that he raises these points. In other words, why in Sefer Yeshua is the story divided up into two parts? And then going back to Parshas Kisava, which is where it's all coming from, the command of Moshe Rabbeinu, the command is also repeated twice. So what's going on over here? So says the Malbim, this is the Mahalach. In Marmuk number 2, Shem Shnei Tzivuyim B'Shnei Zmanim Mechulafim. They're contained in Moshe Rabbeinu's message in Parshas Kisava is really two separate mitzvahs. There's two separate mitzvahs, two separate commands that Moshe Rabbeinu was saying. Tchila Amar. The first command is as follows. Let's go back to Parshas Kisava, right? In Marmuk number 1. So the first command is V'Haya B'Yayim Asher Tavur Sayarden El Aretz Asher Hashem Elokecha Noisen Lach. That the first command is as follows: the day that you cross over the Yarden, okay, you should establish big stones. You should erect large stones, 12 commemorating the 12 tribes. That's mitzvah number 1. That's mitzvah number 1, and that's exactly what happened with Yeshua ben Nun. They were crossing the Yarden. Hashem says to Yeshua, "Okay, let's do what I told Moshe Rabbeinu. Appoint 12 people. These 12 people are going to erect these 12 stones in the place of Gilgal where you're going to sleep tonight." That's mitzvah number 1. Finished. Says the Malbim, again going back in the second line. Hu Tzivui Aleph. That's the first mitzvah that we find regarding these 12 stones. That they were commanded the day that we cross over the Yarden, the day that we pass through the Yarden, not to push it off, but that same day, to erect these 12 stones. And says the Malbim, that's exactly what Yeshua ben Nun did. He erects these 12 stones in this place of Gilgal, literally the day that we pass the Yarden. That's mitzvah number 1. And what was that about? And at that mitzvah, this angle of these 12 stones is about establishing this 12 stones as a simon for the Jewish people and the miracles that happen to them when we cross the Yarden. So it's 12 stones from the Yarden. That's mitzvah number 1. Now the pasuk in Parshas Kisava continues, and it continues as follows. Let's go back to Parshas Kisava. Toward the end of the first pasuk is V'sad oisem b'sid. Now it's interesting. Those few words put lime on them, even though it's in the first pasuk, which sounds like it should be part of the first mitzvah. Says the Malbim, no, really it's part of the second mitzvah. What's the second mitzvah? The second mitzvah now is as follows. V'sad oisem b'sid. You should take those 12 stones at a later day, which I'm not going to tell you when, but take those 12 stones at a later day, cover them with lime. V'chasavta leim es divrei ha-Torah hazayis. And you should write on them the words of the Torah. Ba'avrecha, when you pass over the Yarden, in order that it should be a schus that you'll be able to conquer Eretz Yisrael. So says the Malbim, this other pasuk that I just read is not the same mitzvah as the first pasuk. The first pasuk is mitzvah number 1. Establish 12 stones to represent the Jewish people and the miracles of the Yarden. Finished. Next, at some later point, which is undisclosed right now, you're going to then take these stones and write on them the words of the Torah, and the pasuk will then continue as well that you're also going to turn them into mizbech. That's a new mitzvah. It's a separate mitzvah. Let's take a look in the Malbim and how he describes it. 4 lines into Marmuk number 2. V'amar lehem. Next message, next mitzvah says the Malbim. V'sadata, you should put lime on these stones. V'chasafta, and you should write the words of the Torah. V'chulu ba'avrecha, and this new mitzvah is being told to you to do this ba'avrecha, when you've passed over the Yarden. What's a limer? What do I mean? So it says the Malbim, it means like this. The achrekach ba'avrecha yamim acher shetavar. I mean, in other words, later, at a later date, when you've already gone into Eretz Yisrael and you're already, you're beginning to speak with an Israeli accent already. When it's already into Eretz Yisrael. So tas mitzvah cheres, you have to do another mitzvah ba'avana me'ela with these stones that you fulfilled the first mitzvah with. That you should cover them with lime, and to write on them the words of the Torah. Says the Malbim, and because the first pasuk or 2 is really primarily focusing on the first mitzvah of erecting those stones right away when you get to Gilgal, and it's just sort of referencing in passing the second mitzvah, so it doesn't give so much detail. But then in pasuk Dalid, now it begins to focus the Chumash begins to focus more on that second mitzvah. So this is how the Malbim is explaining it. So again, let's go back to Marmuk number 1 just to break through the psukim. Says the Malbim, this is how the psukim are broken down. The main focus of pasuk Aleph, Aleph through the pasuk Beis Gimel. Pasuk Aleph is a previous one, but the first couple of psukim in Marmukah number 1, the main focus is the first mitzvah. What's the first mitzvah? The day that you cross the Yarden, establish 12 stones. That's the first thing. Happens to be in that context, the pasuk says, "Oh, and by the way, there's more stuff coming with these stones." So it says, like, very, very quickly, cover with lime, write on it, but it doesn't say exactly specific instructions because it's not the point right now. Then in pasuk Dal, now the pasuk says, now let me tell you more in detail what this second mitzvah is about. That that when you passed over the Yarden, in other words, not right away, but later on, when you're ready, when the Yarden's in the rear view mirror, then then take those stones that I commanded you about and erect them in the place of Avel, and now this is when I want you to cover them with lime. Build with them a mizbeach, write in them a Torah, and so this is why there's a little bit of repetition. Because there's really two mitzvahs going on over here. Mitzvah number 1, again, like the Malbim says, is erect the stones when you cross the Yarden. That's the main mitzvah. And once we're talking about those stones, Hashem sort of hints to us, by the way, there's going to be more stuff coming. There's lime going on. There's writing the Torah on it. There's stuff. But then the pasuk says, okay, fine, that's mitzvah number 1. Mitzvah number 2 is, later on, when you have passed the Yarden already, and you're in the place of Ai, which is near the mountains of Har Gerizim and Har Evel, now I want you to take those stones and fulfill the next part of the mitzvah, which is to turn them into mizbeach, write the Torah on them, and that's the 2 parts to this mitzvah. So says again, let's go back to the Malbim. Was it 4 lines before the end? V'zeh shekasav. So this is the meaning of pasuk Dalet already, moving on to the next mitzvah. That b'haya ba'avrim es Yarden, that when you cross the Yarden, kloimer, eze yom achas, and those days later, not right away, but already after you've crossed the Yarden, kipoy lo nemar b'yoim avrachem. Says the Malbim makes an interesting observation. The first pasuk, where it talked about the first mitzvah, it said, the day that you cross the Yarden, do this mitzvah erecting the 12 stones. In pasuk Dalet, where it talks about crossing the Yarden, but it's really talking about the second mitzvah, it doesn't say the day that you cross the Yarden. It says Yarden, when you have crossed the Yarden already. Why doesn't it say the day that you crossed? Because that's not the mitzvah then. The mitzvah is not the actual day that you crossed. It's later when you get to the place of Har Gerizim and Har Evel, which is by the city of Ai. Over there, the next mitzvah comes, which is to build a mizbech from them and so on. So he says, again, that's what he says. Lo nemer b'yom avrachem, doesn't say the day that you crossed. As tekimus avonim b'Har Evel. Then the next mitzvah is to build them to erect them by the mountain of Evel. Shetechem min hamokim shebekimaysim b'malaynos. Take them from the place that they were staying until this point in Gilgal when you cross the Yarden, and bring them and transport them and bring them to the place of Har Evel. The Shamta Kaimis and Mitzvah Partas Hashenis, and now you'll fulfill the second specific mitzvah, which is Lasarais and Besid, to cover them with lime, Livnais and Mizbech, to build from them a Mizbech, V'lichtav Aleim is Divrei Torah, and to build and to write on them the words of the Torah, Haksu Be'eretiv, and to write it in a very clear way. So that's what the Malbim says, and that's how the Malbim teaches what happened in Sefer Yeshua. So there's 2 separate things. Again, that's how the Malbim is teaching it. That's why it's divided into 2 parts in the story. So when we crossed over the Yarden, that's the first part of the mitzvah. And over there, Moshe Rabbeinu, Yeshua ben Nun is commanded by Hashem, designate 12 people, erect these stones. That's mitzvah Aleph. Finished. That's the end of the story of the 12 stones at that point. By the time we get to Har Gerizim and Har Evel, which is after the conquest of Yericho and after the conquest of Ai, so now the pasuk says, now we can fulfill the second part of the mitzvah, which is to take those 12 stones that we had from the Yarden and turn them into Mizbeach, write them in the words of the Torah, and do all this by this designated spot of Har Gerizim and Har Evel by the city of Ai, and that'll be the second mitzvah. So that's why Sefer Yeshua is divided into 2 parts, and that's why this mitzvah in Parshas Kisava is repeated twice, because the first mitzvah is to establish the 12 stones the day that you cross over the Yarden, and then that's number 1. And then number 2 is when you cross over the Yarden, but not that day, but later, but Maisa, when you're in Eretz Yisrael, then erect these stones in Har Gerizim and Har Evel, turn them into Mizbeach, and write on them the words of the Torah. Okay, fine. Kacha. That's how the Malbim teaches.
So part B is not connected to the first time we probably saw is at Har Gerizim and Har Evel.
So this is
the Torah, with
right. So we weren't there in Har Gizman. That's telling us what to do when we get to Har Gizman. Those brachas and clothes, that's going to be the next thing in Sefer Yeshua that they go through. So it's all the same place. It's all the same place. This is like a chana, the first thing for Har Gizman Har Evel. Okay, so what we have to now investigate for the next few minutes is what's the pneumius of this Indian, what's the pneumius of this mitzvah, that the Jewish people are going into Eretz Yisrael having these stones. And it's interesting, because the way the Malbim presents, the way the Malbim teaches it, and the way he's explaining the story, is that these are two separate mitzvahs. But it's interesting, it's two separate mitzvahs, but involving the same objects, right? So we have many mitzvahs, you have Luvanesser, you have Shofar, different objects. Over here, we have an interesting thing, two mitzvahs. Mitzvah number 1, erect these stones in the Yarden when you cross over. Mitzvah number 2, turn stones into a Mizbeach and into a Sefer Torah, pretty much. But it happens to be the same stones. More than it happens to be the same stones, this is more of a technical thing, like sort of in parentheses, but the way the Malbim touched the Psukim is that the first couple Psukim were really focusing on the first mitzvah. But yet, despite the fact that the first couple Psukim are focusing on the first mitzvah, which is just establishing the stones the day that you cross the Yarden, in that context, the Torah still references the fact that, oh, by the way, at some later date, you're going to be covering them with lime and writing on them the words of the Torah. So it's like even when we're talking about the first mitzvah, we're still connecting it and referencing this future mitzvah. So we have to figure out what's the pneumius of this inyan, the purpose of these stones, these two separate mitzvahs, but yet ultimately they're bound to each other. So what's going on over there? Okay. So in Marmukah number 3, you have a piece from Rav Tzaddik. This is in Sefer Pri Tzaddik in Parashas Bamidbar. Now over there, he's not talking about these any of the stones, but he tells us the side. In Parashas Bamidbar, we have Parashas Bamidbar already. The Jewish people left Mitzrayim. We already have the Mishkan, and that's when the Rabban Shalom gives a command to Moshe Rabbeinu to count the Jewish people. Right, counting. That's Parashas Bamidbar, and the mitzvah is that we have to be counted. Each Jew would pass before the eyes of Moshe and Aaron. Moshe and Aaron were the ones in charge of counting the Jewish people. Right? That's the pasuk. So Rav Tzaddik over there is talking about why is it, first of all, the sin of counting the Jewish people, why is it so significant, Aleph, and Beis, why does it have to be dafk with Moshe and Aaron? Sabbath Moshe and Aaron. So says Rav Tzaddik like this, Acha Inyan. The concept is as follows. Al pi mash isa b'Zohar Kadosh. So the Rav Tzaddik quotes the Zohar. The Zohar says, Kivan da'araisa u'mishkana uskamu. Once the Torah was given, and that's by Har Sinai, and the Mishkan was erected. So by the time Sefer Bamidbar comes, you have the Torah, you have the Mishkan. Bo kuchabrichu, and this is how the Zohar Kadosh describes the counting of the Jewish people. Bo kuchabrichu lemifkad chele daraisa. The Rabban Shalom wanted to count the soldiers of the Torah. Kama chayoli inon. How many soldiers are there? The kama chayoli inon the Mishkan, and how many soldiers are there for the Mishkan? So the Rebbeinu Shalom wants to count the Jewish people. Why? He says Isaiah to calculate and to number the amount of soldiers of Torah and soldiers of Mishkan. So that's what the Zohar says. Okay, so comes Rav Tzaddik to explain, like, what does that mean? Soldiers of Torah, soldiers of Mishkan. So it says something like this, Yisayid. So what does it mean to be a soldier of Torah? And what does it mean to be a soldier of the Mishkan? Says Rav Tzaddik. Shekol echad miYisrael. So here, focusing on first the soldier of Torah. The soldier of Torah means, says Rav Tzaddik, that every single Yid, what is a Yid? When you peel back enough layers, it's a well-known Yisayid, we mentioned this many, many times. Yesh li shorish ba'is medivrei Torah. A Yid is not, the way we think of it is like this. There's a Jew, okay, we're definitely holy and special, and the Jewish person, the Jewish people are given two general commands. Learn a lot of Torah and daven to Hashem. Learn and daven. Those are the two basic mitzvahs that preoccupy our schedules pretty much, right? Learning and daven. Okay. Those are mitzvahs that are given to a Jew. Says Rav Tzaddik, that's not the way to think of it. The way to think of it is that every single Yid is a piece of Torah in human form. We know there's such an idea, right? That he's about to reference it in a moment. That the word Yisrael is Rosh Tevis for Yesh, Shishin, Riboy, Isis, Torah. There are 600,000 letters in Torah. The Sefer Torah has 600,000 letters. One way or another. It has 600,000 letters. And so that's not a coincidence. Every single Jew, the Shorish HaNeshama, the very root of a Jewish person's soul, is a piece of Torah. And this is what we find in the Svarim, by the way. This inyan of, Chazal say, for example, a person, when you go to yeshiva, so there's a certain curriculum the yeshiva has. Okay. But when you're already when it's Ben Astarim, right? Or when you're graduated from yeshiva. Like, what should you learn? Like, what should a person learn? So there's certain things, you have to be able to function as an Orthodox Jew, so you have to learn halacha, certain things that you have to learn. But ultimately, when you've sort of covered the things just to allow you to function as a from Yid, what should you learn? So the Gemara says a klal, ma'ashaliv chachavetz, what your heart desires. Why? So yeah, practically, simple level, whatever, if you're interested in something, that's the thing that you're going to put your energy into. But on a deeper level, it's because why do we have to learn? What's the purpose of learning? Or what's happening when a Jew learns? What's happening when a Jew learns, in a certain sense, is that you're unpackaging your own soul. Is that the purpose of creation is for the Torah to be complete. What does it mean for the Torah to be complete? So the Torah is already written, it's given to us, finished. No. The purpose of creation is for the Torah that's in soul form, namely the Jewish people, for that to be fully unpackaged. When you have, after Kriyas Torah, we do Hagbah, right? You unravel it, and you show everyone Zoysa Torah. What's the saying of Hagbah? So there's a lot of inyanim to it, but one of the inyanim of Hagbah is that it's not just enough to read it. By doing Hagbah, we're showing that by learning, we're unpackaging Torah. There's a certain unraveling of the Torah that we're trying to do, and that's the purpose. The Rebbeinu Shalom creates each and every one of us and gives us our neshama, and the purpose of life is to unpackage our neshama, to bring out all the kaiches that we have, to actualize ourselves. How do you actualize yourself? How do you take yourself from being a seed into turning into a tree, so to speak? How do you really bring all your kaiches out? Well, first of all, you have to identify who you are, right? You have to first figure out what is in this seed, right? If this is a seed, if this is a seed for an apple tree, then the ultimate goal is going to have an apple tree. If it's an orange tree, then it's going to be an orange tree. So what is the seed that is called the Jewish soul? It says Rav Tzaddik, you know what that seed is? That seed is a specific aspect of Torah. And when you learn Torah, specifically the Torah that speaks to you, why do you think it speaks to you? It's because it's you, by learning that Torah, and for those ideas to make sense in your particular mind, that's called unpackaging and actualizing the Torah itself, which is you. As we think about it, why is it important that I should learn, Maseches Brachos, when there's so many people out there that have learned Maseches Brachos that are smarter than me and know better than me? Why is it significant that in my mind specifically Maseches Brachos should be there? The answer is because when Rabbi Akiva Eiger learns Maseches Brachos, that's unpackaging a part of Rabbi Akiva Eiger, which is amazing, and no one else can do that. But when I learn Maseches Brachos, it's unpacking a piece of me, and that's something Rabbi Akiva Eiger can't do. And so every single Yid has to learn as much Torah as possible, and specifically the parts of Torah that speak to you, because that's you, and that's how you unpackage yourself, and that's the purpose of creation. This is what it means to be a soldier of Torah. A soldier of Torah is not just someone that you're appointed, this is your job. A soldier of Torah means that you're a part of that's who you are. That's who you are. You took that oath. You know what I mean? That's who you are. So it says Rav Tzaddik. So this is what it means when the Rebbeinu Shalom wants the Yidden to be counted, to know how many soldiers there are for Torah. It means every single Yid has a root in one of the letters of Torah. That's who you are. That's your Metzias. That's what we find in the Svarim. Samach Riboy Isis Torah. There are 600,000 letters to the Torah, corresponding to the number of Yidden, and so on. So that's Yisod number one. Now this is a familiar concept, that every single Yid is basically rooted in Torah, and that's who you are. But what's amazing is the pasuk, the Zohar Kodesh said, the Rebbeinu Shalom wants to count how many soldiers he has for Torah, but also how many soldiers he has for the Mishkan. What is the Mishkan? So the Mishkan always means a place of davening, a place of avodah, a place of karbanos. And it says the Zohar, the Rebbeinu Shalom wants to count his soldiers of Torah, which means that the very root of a Jew is a piece of Torah, and he also wants to count the soldiers of the Mishkan, which means, says Rav Tzaddik, the Chaylan de Mishkana. What does it mean to be a soldier of the Mishkan? It means that the very essence of who a Jew is two parts. There's a part of the Jew who be'etzem, what you are is a piece of underdeveloped and an underdeveloped piece of Torah, and your job in life is to actualize yourself in Torah. And it's also true. You are also fundamentally a piece of davening. You're also a piece of davening. And your purpose of life is to unpackage yourself in terms of Torah, and to unpackage yourself in terms of avodah, in terms of tefillah. And this is what's happening by the Midbar, is that what? That the Jewish people are being counted. The Rosh Hashanah, how many soldiers do I have in Torah? How many soldiers do I have in the Mishkan? And that's how they're being counted with the eyes of Moshe and Aaron. Moshe means Torah, Aaron means Avodah. And that's exactly what's happening. When they're being counted, so we're counting, this guy is Yaakov Moshe ben Zvulun, whatever. So he's being counted. He's being designated. He's being recognized as existing. But what does it mean, Yaakov Moshe ben Zvulun? Who is that guy? Who that guy is a piece of Torah and a piece of davening. And his whole life's mission is to unpackage himself in Torah and in davening. That's his tachlis. That's the mitzias of the Yid. That's where Tzaddik side. Now let's go back to the story of these 12 stones. These 12 stones are in two mitzvahs, but somehow they're integrated with each other. The first mitzvah of these 12 stones was what? The day that we crossed over the Yarden, designate, Hashem says to Yeshua ben Nun, Moshe Rabbeinu as well, 12 people to take 12 stones representing the Jewish people. And you're going to establish them there, and it'll be a zecher for the Jewish people and all the miracles and wonders that we experience to get into Eretz Yisrael. Notice that first mitzvah, the stones of that, the stones in terms of the first mitzvah are stones that represent the Jewish people. That's why there are 12 of them. But then all of a sudden mitzvah 2 comes in. What's mitzvah 2? Take those same 12 stones, which means the Jewish people themselves, and turn them into a mizbeach, and turn them into a Sefer Torah. That's not it's technically a separate mitzvah, but this is all one big yesod, which is the Rebbeinu Shalom is telling the Jewish people, I want you to establish in a concrete, tangible way what the Yidden are. And what the Yidden are basically a mizbeach and a Sefer Torah. That's what you are. That's what you are. So Dafka take these 12 stones, which represent the Jewish people, number one. First establish them as these stones represent the Jewish people, number one. And number two, now that it's established and it's ingrained that these stones represent the Jewish people, turn them into a mizbeach and turn them into a Sefer Torah. Because this is what's happening, and this is why it's Dafka this mitzvah, this inyan is happening. The Torah says, when you get into Eretz Yisrael, when you cross over Eretz Yisrael, Moshe Rabbeinu even says, in order that you should merit to have the land. Because what is Eretz Yisrael? Eretz Yisrael is a place in which all those seeds of the Jewish people are planted and all these trees are able to grow. Eretz Yisrael is not just a place on earth, stam. Every nation needs a place to live, so including the Jewish people. No. Eretz Yisrael is fertile ground for the Jewish people. Every yid is a seed that produces one of two things, a piece of Torah and a piece of davening. But those seeds need ground, they need to be planted, they need to be in an environment that's able to allow the potential to be unpackaged. And that's what Eretz Yisrael is. Eretz Yisrael is a place that the Jewish people are going to be able to be themselves, right? Even on a very, very human level, right? When you're in exile and you're amongst the nations of the world, there's a certain you can't be yourself. Either you're cautious of keeping things in because you don't want to start up with the nations around you, or you want to assimilate chas v'shalom. But either way, it's very hard to really allow yourself to be fully yourself. Like the Gemara, we find such a thing that dafki. So that's what does Eretz Yisrael mean practically? On a very simple level, Eretz Yisrael means it's your own space, be yourself, and bring out, unpackage yourself. That's true physically and nationally, and that's true spiritually too. That's what Eretz Yisrael is. So therefore, since Eretz Yisrael is what? Eretz Yisrael is a place in which the Jewish people are able to fully allow themselves to discover who they are. And so what is a Jew? What a Jew is a piece of Torah and a piece of davening. That's what a Jew is. And that's exactly what's going on with this mitzvah. Take these 12 stones, establish these 12 stones to represent the Jewish people, and then turn those stones into a mizbeach and into a Sefer Torah. Now, here's the interesting thing. Why is it davka that this mitzvah was fulfilled b'shleimus, in completion, after the conquest of Ai? Now, you could say, practically, because the second mitzvah, for whatever reason, the Rebbeinu Shalom decided that this second stage of turning those stones into a mizbeach and into a Sefer Torah has to be done in the place of Har Gerisim and Har Evel. It happens to be that area of those two mountains was by the city of Ai, so you had to conquer the city of Ai to get to those two mountaintops. So it's just a coincidence that this second mitzvah is happening after the conquest of Ai. But it's not a coincidence. Nothing can be a coincidence. Nothing b'chlal is a coincidence. Certainly not anything like this is not a coincidence. The city of Ai is the first place that we failed. That's the first place that we had that we lost. That we actually suffered a loss and suffered a failure, and only then we had to sort of get back and fight again. We find in this farm, as we're going to end off with in Marmukah number 4, we find this with our tzaddik, that in order for a person, this is not a simple idea, in order for a person to truly discover their portion of Torah, or to truly discover their portion of Tefillah, to truly turn their stones into a Mizbeach, or into a Sefer Torah, you have to go through failure. You have to go through failure. You have to go through a point of where you have to sort of hit a place in your life where you're desperate for it. Take a look at Ritzadik. Ritzadik writes in Marmukah number 4, HaTorah v'Tefillah, learning and davening, which again, as we established, that is a Jew. And to truly come to that place in yourself that's called Torah, to truly, really become a soldier of Torah and to embrace your soldierhood. Is there a word for that? I don't know. To embrace your soldierness as in Torah or in Tefillah.
Mission.
Huh?
Mission.
Yeah, but okay, fine. Mission, fine. To embrace that Indian, that you're a soldier in Torah and in Tefillah. So in order to do this, says Ritzadik, Shnehem rak l'mishu chaser u'muvakesh hashlama. It's only possible to truly do this is if you recognize that without Torah and Tefillah, your mom is missing. So it's like, if everything's going right in life, and it's like, okay, everything's fine, it's kavaldik, and Torah is amazing, davening is amazing, so I might as well do it also, so I'll learn and I'll daven. That's not going to be a learning and davening that's a self-discovery type of learning and davening. It's not going to be a davening and learning where it's an unpackaging of yourself, where it's a redefinition of who you are. That's not a pneumistic of learning, not a pneumistic of davening. The only way to truly come to a pneumistic place of learning and davening is if you feel that without this, I'm mamish empty. And how do I know that I'm mamish empty? Because I've suffered without it. And I've hit rock bottom without it. And now when I know that without Torah and Tefillah, I'm mamish empty, and I have nothing, so now I can truly embrace learning and davening in a way that it'll penetrate, but more than penetrate, it'll show that that's who I am. The only way to truly bond with Torah and Tefillah, says Ritzadik, is only if you're absolutely at a place of desperation. And the only way to get to a place of desperation, usually, is if you've gone through failures. So practically speaking, the only way to truly come to Torah and Tefillah in a pneumistic way is if a person experiences failures first. And that's exactly what the Gemara says. The Gemara says in Gittin, where Tzaddik quotes this Chazal all over the place. Right? The Gemara says, Ein adam aymin al divrei Torah, elam kein nichshel ben tchila. That the only way for a person to truly conquer an area of Torah is only if you've made a mistake in that area first. And so an example of the Gemara is that a certain Amar paskin incorrectly, and he says, because I passed it incorrectly and I had to deal with the ramifications of that, now I know what the halach is. Like, I'm never going to forget that. So a person only truly conquers Torah if they made a mistake first. But Tzaddik always uses that as in this context, in a deeper way, which is, it's not just a matter of like, okay, now I'll remember the halacha because I remember the embarrassment I had when I passed it incorrectly. It's more than that. To truly get to that place of Torah where Torah becomes where Torah is a revelation of who you are and it becomes integrated into your system, you have to desperately want it. And to desperately want it means that you've experienced the vacuum of life without it. And so that's what's going on here. It says Ritzadik, so it gets Torah and Tefillah, Shneim Rakli Mishu Chaser, Muvakesh Hashlama Adei Tefillah Adei Torah. The only time to truly conquer Torah and Tefillah is only when by a person that it's not just a cherry on top or a nice thing. It's that the person feels absolutely missing and completely empty without it. Mashakasa b'Shabbos, that's exactly what the Gemara says regarding Har Sinai, Shavuos, which is coming, that the Malachim say to Moshe Rabbeinu, they say to Hashem, why the Jewish people get the Torah? They have so much Yetzer Hara, so much problems. And what does Moshe Rabbeinu say? Exactly. That's exactly why we get the Torah, because we have so many problems. What does that mean? The answer is because we have so many problems and we've made so many failures, then that it's after because of that, then we engage in Torah and we engage in Avodas Hashem, it's going to be with all of our heart and all of our soul, and it's going to resonate in all of our hearts and all of our soul, and we're going to be able to become redefined as people because of it. It's going to become integrated with who we are, not a separate thing that we're just casually doing. If a person is everything's fine in life, then all the mitzvahs that they do are also just casually. But only a person that hits rock bottom, that experiences what life is like without Torah and Tefillah, that's a person that can truly embrace Torah and Tefillah. So let's go back. It's Davka the moment when the Jewish people collectively, nationally, in Eretz Yisrael suffered our first loss in the city of Ai, and were able to bounce from that, and to then conquer the city of Ai, and to overcome that. Now the Jewish people can take those 12 stones and turn them into a Mizbech and turn them into a Sefer Torah. Because until that point of Ai, where we never experienced a failure, then there's still the Yidden and Torah and Tefillah. It's not fully integrated because you're not coming with desperation. Only after experiencing the failure of Ai, now it means, and that's not just a physical failure. Everything the Jewish people experienced militarily is just a reflection of what's going on in the neshama. If we experienced a failure and a loss in the city of Ai, it means in our Avodas Hashem there was a loss. Now the Jewish people failed. You failed. Now you could re-engage in Torah and Tefillah in a way that you're becoming Torah and you're becoming Tefillah. And that's the Avodah. That's the Avodah of this mitzvah. So Hashem should help us. That we should be zech this time of year, right? That's what Sfira Seimer is. Sfira Seimer is a time of where we're making hachanas for Matan Torah, for Shavuos, which is about Torah, and it's also about Tefillah. So we should be zech to realize that all the failures that we've had in our lives are not the hindrances holding us back from our sinah. Adarabba. It's because of that that we're the only ones that we're so desperate for our sinah, because otherwise look what happens to us if we don't have it. And that's exactly the way we're going to be zeicha to become pieces of Torah and become pieces of Tefillah. To experience that. Amen.